Hey, EDU307, it is Dr. McBarry here, and we are in our workshop models. Now, this is really a pedagogical technique that's used in a lot of classrooms. And in this module, we've been talking a little bit about reading and writing workshop. And all of these workshop methods boil down to a couple parts. You have your mini lesson, right? Then you have your independent writing or reading time, with varying degrees of choice depending on your curricular goals. Then you have your conferring time, and finally the readers and writers notebooks. Now, I'm not going to cover the mini lessons as much because you guys are doing case studies, watching successful mini lessons in the classrooms, and we're going to be talking about conferring in another daily update. But in today's episode, I really want to focus in on how to use the readers and writers notebooks in your classrooms. So I'm going to start off with the readers notebooks. And basically, what do we know about teaching reading? Well, the best way to increase comprehension is through text-based analysis and text-based discussion. But at the same time, motivation and drive, those are essential. The amount of variance that can be explained using different ways to measure how motivated or the self-efficacy of readers, it explains a lot about their reading comprehension in later grades. And once students do not see themselves as a reader and a writer, then it's harder and harder to provide them the support they need to get back on grade level. And we've talked about this a lot. And community is our curriculum in the literacy classroom. And the notebook is one way that you can gel everyone together in some kind of shared experience. So what's the purpose of a reader's notebook? Mainly, it provides you data, but it's not for you. That's what you have to realize. The purpose is for your learners. You want them to be creating their own personal space where they're capturing their memories and reflections of reading. And that does provide you with evidence over time. But you want the students to basically be building the strategies that we know good readers do. And good readers do take notes. And good readers, when they're reading fiction, interact with it. And what we're doing is all that interaction that good readers do in their heads, we're trying to make external and have our learners practice by doing it on paper in their notebooks. But we also want them to own it. And the notebook is a way to really track the workshop methods. So if you're starting at your mini lesson and you're moving down to guided practice to independent practice, the notebook is that bridge. It's the arrows in between each of those steps that allow the student to set their goals, report on how well they're meeting their goals when they're working with a group, and then reflect on how well they met their goals in their own reading. They could also be doing other kinds of tasks in that book. But you also want to make the reader's notebook their own, just like Emma designed it. Give them the autonomy, design it, have fun with those notebooks, and finally provide kids the space to use it in the classroom, connected to their reading. So if they're, no matter the grade level, they're reading a book, you want them writing about what they're reading. Independent readings, SSR, without doing anything with what the kids read, it's a waste of instructional time. And the reader's notebook is one way that you can kind of capture the understanding and the growth that students may get in independent reading programs. So what do you do in the elementary school? Basically, make them customizable. Have fun. Play with them. Design them in any way, shape, or form that you want. And if this is on, again, this could be your blog too. So spend some time teaching kids how to customize their blogs and how to change them around. And then set them up in sections. Some sections for the elementary school could be personal goals sections, reflections on the readings, reading logs, genre guides. I know in my classrooms, I would also add a vocabulary section. And whenever we were reading a novel, I would have them draw character bio pages. So they'd make a page for each character in the bio. Then they would do the plot diagram and over 2 pages and track that. We'd have vocabulary sections. So you can design the notebooks for every bit of writing that you're doing, whether it's a short story unit, a poetry unit, or if you are doing a novel. Here's an example of the reading goals. And this is a frequency goal. I will try to read historical fiction this month. So it's not so there's different kinds of goals. You can have a process goal where they're focusing on what they're doing. And then the frequency goals where that's, I want to read X kind of books by when. Not too keen on that per se. More topical because I believe, in knowledge is equaling comprehension more so than just the number of books read. So I prefer my reading goals when I'm setting frequency goals is to be topical. Like I want to learn about, instead of historical fiction, I want to use historical fiction to learn about George Washington. And, here down here, now here's a process goal. I will try to stop after each chapter and think. And you can see how a student could track that goal. At the end of each chapter, they could stop and think and then write 2 sentences about what they thought about. So that's very doable. You could also do like word attack fluency goals, genre goals. You're the teacher, you're the student. Like work together to establish the objectives that you want your kids to reach in the classroom. What goals and does that child need to help them grow as a reader? Then use the notebook to track that knowledge growth. So there's some other kinds of goals as well in there, thinking goals, reading behavior goals, but you can really just play. But it comes down to reflections. That's the real power as a learning tool that we find in a reader's notebook, is that you want students to be deeply reflecting on what they read. And you notice we can't always write in our textbook. So here's a strategy that we often use in the classroom is we use Post-it notes. And that way kids can annotate a book without writing in the book. One thing that I've always done is then I'll do a post grid in that they could put in a notebook where they can put their Post-its right there to kind of show that their growth or that they're doing the task. Younger students, you might want to let them draw and illustrate their summaries of a story. And you could also just do different responses if your school district uses something like an IDR task, any kind of just journal. Like you want them just to be reflecting on what they're learning. And you also want them reflecting on their goals too. Like make sure you do take the time and say, how have I met my goal? This is how I proved I met my goal, and this is where I need to go next. That's a very important thing for students to do in their readers' notebooks. The reading logs. We do these reading logs all the time. I don't put much credence in them. I mean, it's great that you can track the pages, but oftentimes it's reducing reading down to a task, like a chore. I know with my own children, it's like, I got to do 20 minutes of reading. It's like instead of just, I want to read out of pleasure, it becomes a chore. One thing you must have of a reading log is they need to do something. Don't just record page numbers. Make them write a summary. Set a goal like, hey, and this week's in our reading logs, you're going to write about a character trait and how a character demonstrated that trait. You're going to give me the beginning, middle, and end of each one of your books if it's younger students. Look at the Common Core State Standards. But whatever you do, don't just do a reading log where they're just tracking page numbers. It's useless. You can have them track which genres of books that they read over time. I think that's always a fun task. It's also a great way to connect literacy and mathematics. Self-assessments for their own readers' notebooks, but you as a teacher, how do you want to assess them in their readers' notebooks? You could use a rubric. I'm trying to get away from turning everything into a rubric, but if I am going to do it, I do like holistic ones, such as this, where it's multiple criterion, and I'm just choosing an overall score versus, 1 box here, 1 box there, 1 box there, 1 box there. 20 boxes for a 6-year-old is useless. It doesn't mean anything. The other thing is you can have kids then curate their notebooks into longer posts. Like, hey, I want you to go through and we're going to design our own books from our readers' notebooks to show us how we grew this year. That act of like curating your own growth at the end of the year by flipping through 185 days of lessons, that in itself is such powerful learning that we can do with our students through our readers' notebooks. And you always want to have different anchor charts and ideas hanging in your classroom to help kids assess their own growth and to provide models and exemplars as they're trying to use a reader's notebook to grow their own literacy skills. So make sure that when you're doing this, in a way, your assessment is driving your instruction, but it's not about, here's a quarter 1 text. Now it's within 2 weeks. Let's give them the test again. No. This is about capturing ongoing routines and looking for knowledge growth in very natural ways, but also understanding that you need to assess that space of learning more than each individual student. If I want to look at how well your students are reading and writing, I care more about that community, that literacy community that you're creating, more than the individual growth of the students. And you have to differentiate your goals for students, because what happens now in most reading classrooms is the students are going to get the A in the beginning, are going to get the A in the end, because we don't really measure students on growth. We come up with fake numbers to sort kids, or we label kids in the reading abilities as being low and requiring extra interventions and call that differentiation. By, hey kids, now it's time to go to intervention period. There should not be a period at school called intervention. That's silly. It's like, that's not what reading is about. So look for ways to use, and I think a notebook is a way to do this, to track knowledge growth in a more natural way, without giving a test every 2 seconds. And this is where I do think blogs long-term, or portfolios, may have a benefit over regular reading notebooks, except for the fact that I think you think faster. Well, I know I think faster in pen and pencil, and I will always have a notebook or random just pages that scrap random writing all the time, all over the place. My desk is just littered in just, different scraps of thinking. And but I do try to keep a general thought notebook, and I have them separated for different topics. It's part of my ongoing routine. And if you do that as a classroom teacher, I think you will find the Reader's Notebook is a great way to support workshop methods in the classroom. And there's some rubrics, blah, 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 rubrics. All right, so if you want some more information on Works Cited, you can find some here. Thanks all, and in our next talk, I will go over writer's notebooks.